Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a jealous Karen neighbor despised me for not being a part of the HOA. She repeatedly pressured me into joining, and when I refused, she used a taser on me to intimidate me. Here is what happened in the homeowner association. Since I was about 15 years old, I had an idea of a dream house for myself. It was one of the things that kept me motivated through high school and college. I found a few years ago a beautiful empty plot of land where I could build that house. Everything was perfect, and I even managed to find a loophole to not be a part of the local HOA. Since the plot was empty and the house did not exist, I was technically buying land and not a home. HOA rules had it so new home buyers had to be in the HOA. And well, I'm the kind of person that loves a loophole and takes advantage of it. So everybody around me was in the HOA, but I wasn't. The only person that hated this was the HOA president herself, named Karen. After my amazing house was done, I started getting calls and visits from the Karen. She was trying to tell me that I had to sign the deed over to the HOA and move out. Not even joining the HOA, she just wanted me gone to sell the house. I refused, but she kept pestering and pressuring me into giving over the deed. Also, yes, not selling to the HOA, but just giving her the house. I refused every single time, but she seemed to think that she could wear me down. One day, she showed up at my house again, demanding that I sign over the deed. This time, she was a little bit louder and more aggressive in telling me to do it. I told her to get off my property, and she was never gonna get my house. I even said I would stay in the house no matter what, just to personally spite her, calling her some colorful names and her yelling back at me. It was a fairly even argument until she pulled out her taser. I did not think it was real, and she was just trying to scare me. She told me again to sign over the house, and when I refused, she pulled the trigger and tased me. I screamed loudly, and she kept the taser going longer than she probably should have. A neighbor heard my screams and called the police, who arrived to find me on the ground crying, with Karen standing over me, holding the taser and threatening to use it again. I was in too much pain to fully grasp everything going on around me. What I did notice was Karen screaming and police dragging her away. Then I was being hoisted onto a stretcher and into an ambulance. I was taken to the hospital since I was just a mess, and it was determined that Karen probably tased me for close to 20 seconds. Which I looked up and found a police tasing somebody is usually only about 5. I had burns where the taser went in and had to get an EKG to check my heart function. I will say that for the next 4 days, every single muscle in my body hurt from seizing up. It was just horrible, and the police met me at the hospital to give me an update about Karen. She was in their custody and being held on an assault charge. I was asked if I wanted to press charges against her for it, and I said yes about 5 times in 3 seconds. They told me she would be processed and held until the trial or bail was posted, but that I was getting an order of protection, so she cannot go near me even if she gets out on bail. When we went to trial, we had a jury and everything, since she decided to plead not guilty. Now, Karen was not trying to deny using the taser, but she claimed that she did it in self-defense because I attacked her first. Well, now I have one of those Ring cameras for my door, and it caught everything that happened. The argument and me not touching her at all before she pulled out the taser and then attacked me with it. There's not anything as clear-cut as that. And yeah, by the way, Ripe stars, it seems like having one of those Ring doorbell cameras, or whatever they are called, is probably one of the best investments you can make if you have a Karen neighbor. These things apparently can almost save your life. Anyway, we also had people from the neighborhood and the HOA members giving character statements saying that Karen was not stable and caused a lot of fights in the neighborhood. They even said that they were threatened by Karen to not speak in court, but they did anyway. Another bad look for Karen, the jury went back and came with a guilty verdict for Karen. The best moment had to be what the judge said when doling out her punishment. The judge said, "For felony assault, and this being your 3rd conviction for it, you're being sent to prison name for 5 years. Yeah, it turns out this was not the first time she had done something like this and gotten caught. She was arrested and sent to prison for assault and clearly learned nothing from it. Now, the HOA as a whole was also being charged, since she was at my house allegedly on behalf of them. They were found being negligent in allowing a convicted violent felon to be president and go around threatening people. In fact, nobody with a conviction was supposed to be on the HOA board at all. They had to make new policies and structures to make sure that not only couldn't a criminal be on the board again, but that a Karen couldn't either, forcing all communications to go through certain channels and other stuff that honestly I don't think anybody cares about. What you might care about is that the HOA had to give me money and plenty of it, covering my medical costs and also a tidy sum for the 2 years of harassment that I ensued at the hands of Karen. So now I not only had my dream house, but some money that I could spend on myself and put away for a rainy day. This whole thing ended about a year ago and I've not heard a single peep from the HOA since. I'm being left alone to enjoy my house and my life without fear of being harassed or attacked again. I think I'm most grateful that I had no lasting damage from being tased. I was worried that my heart would get messed up or something, but it didn't. I also wanted to say that I found out a neighbor called the police during the whole thing because they came to me after I got home from the hospital, telling me that they heard the screams and wanted to make sure that I was now okay. I thanked her and she has actually become a pretty good friend since then. So I also got a nice friend out of the entire ordeal, which to me is like getting a 10-piece chicken nugget and finding that there is an 11th one in there. I even told her that she was like the 11th nugget and she loved it so much that Nugget is now my nickname for her. Anyway, I've yet to meet a Karen as insane as the one I did during this whole ordeal. And honestly, if I could go the rest of my life avoiding a Karen like her, I would be happy and consider having a very blessed and lucky life. Because I know there are plenty like her out there, walking amongst us and just waiting for their moment to be entitled and pounce. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that is a very cute compliment to call someone your 11th nugget. Maybe next time try calling your partner or spouse your 11th nugget. Curious what they will have to say. Anyway, if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment, since that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much for helping me defeat the algorithm, and now let's continue with an office revenge story. This is not my story, it belongs to a friend of mine. I couldn't stop laughing at the subtlety and nuance of her win this week and I have to relate it. So A is an executive assistant for the CEO. While she works mostly for one person, there is an executive team that she also does some work for, and one of these is C. C, for want of a better word, is the epitome of the office Karen. She takes great joy in being condescending, rude, taking credit for everyone else's work, and throwing people under the bus. Difficult to work with is a bit of an understatement though. When A first started working there, C reported her to her boss for attitude on a number of occasions when all A was doing was trying to hide her frustration because C was deliberately being obtuse and making A's life unnecessarily difficult. A's boss is well aware of the friction, however C is actually very good at her job and she's clever enough to not cross lines that will get her in deep trouble. A decided if she could not beat them, she would join them in the best and most subtle possible way. Earlier this week, A ensured her boss overheard her talking to a client praising C to the heavens. It was actually a real client call, not faked. When she hung up, her boss praised her for being the bigger person and talking up C despite their relationship. When C came in, the boss made a special mention to her that A had been praising her while A just sat there smiling innocently at her. C was not happy about this but couldn't do or say a thing without looking like an ass. To put the cherry on top, the following morning, A greeted her with, "C, you look so tired. Are you okay? Can I make you a coffee?" C said no and stomped into her office. Every time she came out, A proceeded to say, "You really don't look well. Are you sure you're okay? Is there anything I can do for you?" Meanwhile, A's boss overheard all of these exchanges and once again praised her for setting aside their differences and trying to make things work. By the end of the day, C was visibly seething and A was the boss's new favorite. We believe C may well be a basket case by Christmas. And by the way, Ripe Stars, I'm wondering what basket case means in this, well, case. Because usually I thought that basket case means that you're like crazy or something, but maybe that's exactly what OP means. Since C was certainly a little bit crazy to say the least. Either way, the next one is another petty revenge story. So 2 years ago in undergrad, I lived in an apartment off campus and rented one of 3 garage spots in the building. Because of the layout of the driveway, a car parked anywhere in the driveway would prevent access in or out of all 3 spots. For this reason, no one was allowed to park in the driveway driveway, as was made clear by signage outside. Of course, other people in my building and the building next door would quite often leave a car or two in the driveway, sometimes just for 10 minutes, sometimes overnight. This became quite frustrating to those of us parking there, especially because we were paying so much for those spots. The main culprits were the guys in the unit above me. The first time I really interacted with them, they laughed about how it was so funny that we would get so annoyed that they blocked us in. Needless to say, this really irritated me and I knew it would continue unless I took action. Yes, I did email the landlord about it first, and no, they did not respond. This drove me to pursue alternate methods of discouraging the driveway trespassers. The first tactic was known as the cheese drop. As the name suggests, whenever I noticed a car parked in my driveway, for an extended period of time, I would go out on my balcony next to the driveway and drop a slice of cheese down onto the car. It was provolone and it was expired, so even better. After doing this several times, I eventually saw them discover the cheese, and they were amused by it. I decided to escalate my antics. The three of us that parked there were responsible for shoveling the driveway when it snowed. The guys above us would always let their friends drive over the snow before we could shovel. When we had a big snowstorm, we noticed that they had let one of their friends park in our driveway. We told him he needed to move, and his solution was to pull up off the driveway into the neighbor's yard rather than leave. The neighbor's Wi-Fi was literally named "Don't Park in Our Yard." They left us his number, and I texted him and said he couldn't stay there overnight. He told me that I could move the car myself if we wanted it moved, so when it snowed, we barricaded his car with several feet of snow on all sides. We locked our shovels up knowing they didn't have their own. I watched from my apartment as they discovered their car fully blocked in. I warned them that we put the snow there when we shovel, and they must have stood there with their hands on their heads for at least 10 seconds before one dug it out while the other stood around watching. The message was still ignored, so I took it a step further. I designed my own parking tickets and ticket envelopes and ordered them from one of those stationary websites. Now, every time a car would park in my driveway, I would issue them a ticket. For legal reasons, I could not actually find them or impersonate any kind of authoritative entity, but I got great satisfaction knowing that they would get that feeling of panic upon seeing an orange envelope on their windshield. They may have even thought the landlord actually put them there, who knows. Needless to say, a lot of fewer people parked in my driveway after that. The next one is titled Retail Karen Craziness, and it's a story from r/Tales from Retail. So let's set the scene real quick. I'm a supervisor at one of the main grocery stores here in Australia. I'm currently filling in a shift at another nearby store, and at the time I was manning the self-serve checkouts and I noticed 3 kids come in by themselves, no parent, one pushing a scooter. Now these kids were about 10 to 15 years old probably. They looked like your typical troublemaking kids you see running around everywhere, although they did comply with instructions when I told them that they could not ride their scooter in the store. One of them grabbed a Kit Kat and purchased that and started to eat it while the others grabbed a 24-pack of soft drink cans. The two with the soft drink proceeded to come through self-serve and start to put money into the machine, but then they noticed that they were short. While they are discussing urgently about why they were short and did the Kit Kat guy spend their money, one realized that he had lost a $5 note. I was feeling in a good mood and spontaneously decided to cover the $3 for them. They were polite and said thanks, but the reason I'm writing this is for what happened next. One of the kids found their $5 they dropped on the floor outside the store, came back and offered it to me, which I refused and said that they could keep it. They then asked that I take it, and if any other customers were a few dollars short, I use it to cover the extra. As their way of paying it forward, basically. I accepted, put the money in our loose change tin, and sort of wished their parents were around so I could tell them that they had raised some awesome kids. And the next one is another Tales from Retail story. So I work in photo finishing, and I was helping a friendly lady who wanted prints off of her phone. She offhandedly mentioned that she recently lost all the photos on her phone, so she was only able to get prints from the last few weeks. I found it odd that the photos would just disappear, but the phone was still working. She insisted, despite being a technology illiterate, that she didn't accidentally delete them. She also offhandedly mentioned that she thought her phone had a memory card in it. This needed further investigation. I fully expected her to not have a micro SD card since many older folks call the SIM card a memory card, but lo and behold, there was one inside. I put the card into one computer and it didn't show up at all, so I tried our Windows PC instead and it told me the disk was unformatted. Likely corrupted somehow by her cheap off-brand Android, I didn't want to get her hopes up, but since Windows was able to see it, I thought there might be a chance. So I took a deep breath, formatted it, and threw it onto our recovery software. I was able to recover 90% of the photos and videos on that card. The lady had been waiting for her prince anyway, so I waved for her to come around to my computer and take a look. She looked at the photos on the screen and literally started bawling. It was all her most important pictures: her grandson's grad, her dog that had passed away a few months ago, family trips, years worth of pictures that were not backed up anywhere. In the end, she bought a new microSD and I gave her a DVD of the pictures at no charge. After paying, she ran behind the counter and gave me a big hug. I later found out that she had handwritten my boss a letter and said it was the best customer service she had ever had. Today has been a good day. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I don't read Tales from Retail too often because sometimes the stories are not that amazing. However, I gotta say, a lot of these stories really make you feel good. Let me know what you think about that subreddit in the comments and I might continue reading it. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Adoption. It's something that I knew I would partake in from the age of 15. Whenever anyone mentioned my future and having kids, that is where my mind would go. To adoption. When I was 25, I met Josie. We met at work, both of us working for Google, me a software developer and her an intern. Sparks flew immediately and before we knew it, a year had passed and we started dating and then another 4 years marriage. And then, when we were 3 years into our marriage, we adopted a baby boy who we named Chris. Before the adoption, we moved into a new neighborhood and got out a mortgage on a very nice house. Both of us had many promotions with Google by this point and could afford to live rather luxuriously. Said neighborhood, as we discovered, had a very strict homeowners association group. The woman who was the president of the group lived on the other side of the neighborhood, and from the get-go, we began having our issues. "Hi, I'm here to welcome you to the neighborhood," she spoke in a cheery tone as I opened the door to greet her for the first time. "Let's call her Karen. You will see why." "Oh, thank you. I've just moved here with my partner," I replied, happily accepting the pecan pie she was holding, excited to have such friendly neighbors. "I would also like to give you this. It's just the guidelines that we all stick to, just to ensure our neighborhood looks lovely." She handed me a flyer with HOA on it. It's a common thing over here that neighborhoods have these, so this was not much of a concern to me, and I did have a feeling they would have one, considering how neat and tidy all of the other houses are. "Once we finished unpacking, we'll be sure to get started on the garden work," I said with a smile as I read the first page about the front lawn, the grass height and flowers, etc. "Thanks so much. Is your husband home?" she asked. "Oh, no, I don't have a husband," I replied. "Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. Cohabitation of non-married couples is becoming the norm, is it not?" She smiled, clearly not getting what I meant. But she did when Josie came to the door saying, "Who is it?" "You two are not married, are you?" Karen replied with a shaky voice. "We are. Is that gonna be an issue?" I stared at her as she began widening her eyes. Probably. You're kinda always causing issues, saying we are not woke enough or something. There should be a rule in there prohibiting this." She poked the flyer as she said that last part, and then turned and stormed off, turning her head around as she did so. "And that grass better be cut when I next see you." Me and Josie shared a look as if to say, "Oh no." All I could hope was that the rest of the neighborhood were not at all like her. I told Josie about the rest of the conversation and how she was perfectly sweet before learning that we were lesbians. It was not difficult to figure out that she was a homophobe a couple of months into moving in and Chris was finally able to come home. We had never been more happy than the day he was officially ours and in our arms. The months leading up to it were occasionally uncomfortable with Karen. For a while she would find every little thing she could pick on and make it our issue. The flowers are not tall enough, read the handbook. The paint is peeling, read the handbook. You're too loud at night, read the handbook. The last one made no sense because the night in question was a night we were not even home. She might have well just said, "No lesbians, read the handbook." Even still, we didn't want trouble, so we smiled and nodded and just let her be. She eventually calmed down after a while, but when she got news that we now had a baby boy, things changed. We assume one of our other neighbors told her in one of their meetings, and probably not in a malicious way. All of the other neighbors have been nothing but, well, neighborly since we arrived. The first time she called around after hearing the news was with the police. "Karen, what's going on? Why is the police here?" I asked, shocked and angry at the smirk on her face. "We just want to ask you a few questions. We hear you have a new baby," one of the officers asked, and my face paled as I realized what she had done. "It's kidnapped, sir. They are gay. They cannot have a baby," Karen spoke up, feigning terror. "We adopted him, thank you very much," I remarked. Before anyone could reply, we let the officers inside so they could see our adoption paperwork. "Not you, though," I stated to Karen as she began putting her foot through the door. She pulled a sour face, which I simply shut the door on. Not even 10 minutes later, and everything was cleared up. The police went on their way, leaving a very angry Karen on our doorstep. "That poor child needs a mother and a father," Karen tutted before storming off once more, kicking over a gnome on the grass. Me and Josie went inside to talk about what had happened. Both of us were in quite a state afterwards. It was not a nice experience to have someone questioning your family, as I'm sure you can imagine. "Is everything okay over here?" I heard through the door and opened it to reveal the sweet old lady who lived next door. We let her in and explained everything that had happened. She had watched the encounter from her window. She was easily the nicest neighbor we ever had and loved to come around to fuss over Chris. She even offered to babysit whenever, which was handy when we both worked late and couldn't pick him up from nursery. For the next couple of weeks, Karen kept calling around saying anything and everything that was homophobic or just plain ignorant of our situation. We never thought she would go this far. However, one Monday, we dropped off Chris at kindergarten/nursery and everything felt normal. We ended up having to stay late at work because the office was doing some migration to a different processor and all hands on deck were needed to secure the files. We rang the lady who lived next door and asked if she could collect Chris and watch him for a few hours. She was delighted to hear that and said she would go straight away. But half an hour later, we got another call. "He's not here," she yelled down the phone. "They are saying he's gone missing." "What?" I have shouted down the phone. "Miss, you need to get her straight away. We're not sure what has happened. He hasn't been counted back in from playing outside. Nobody else has come to collect him." One of the caregivers picked up the phone to say this. I barely even heard the rest as me and Josie had already ran out of the building and into our car. I nearly crashed multiple times on the way. The only thing I could think about was our sweet boy and what danger he was in. If you're a parent, I'm sure you will understand the feeling of pure terror as the possibilities of what happened swarm around your head like a wasp nest. Once we got there, the police had already been called and a search party was out. "Is there anyone you know would take him?" the police asked. I was crying hysterically and that's when Josie suddenly spoke up. "Yes," she looked at me and I knew straight away who she was referring to. We all raced to Karen's house, us in the police car as they knew we were not fit to drive. Our neighbor, bless her, was so worked up she had convinced herself that it was her fault and that if only she had gotten there a few minutes earlier. We of course assured her the best we could that it was not her fault and resent her we would not. We heard it, the crying of a baby. The police barged through the door and stormed all over the house until we found Karen huddled in a chair with our baby boy in her lap. I felt so relieved that we had found him. It could have been so much worse. "Slowly hand us the child," the officer demanded, placing his gun on the floor. "I'm his real mother. These two horrible women flew from England where we all lived with my baby. They are only living here to avoid jail time." Karen sounded hysterical and it was at this point when a teenage boy came downstairs. "Mom, what's going on here?" he asked, eyeing the baby. "You already have a son. Why do you want ours?" I demanded. "He's not yours," she began. "Mom, this has to stop. You've been obsessed with them for too long. I don't even recognize you anymore. Give them back their baby." The son looked in a mix between anger, hurt and confusion. Karen loosened her hold on the baby as she stared down at her son with a guilty expression. The police quickly snatched Chris and handed him to us. Karen stayed silent as handcuffs were placed on her wrists and she was led into a cop car. We watched as she drove off. Her son also went with them. She ended up getting 15 years for kidnapping a child and of course she got a permanent restraining order on us too, plus our baby, and she would never be allowed to step foot in this neighborhood again. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance and I hope to see you again tomorrow.